Hello everyone, it's Infinity Gamer here, and this is a quick update, video update for you because the N4 FAQs have just dropped. Now, I know I only launched a video yesterday, and usually I'm a one-a-week kind of video person, but these are some really important updates, and so I thought I'd give you my hot takes, show you what I've noticed that I think is quite important from these N4 FAQs. This feeds quite nicely onto a previous video that I did that shows rules abuse that some people were doing with the initial N4 rules, and a couple of those have been completely canned as a result of these FAQs. So let's dive into the N4 FAQs. It's been about 6 months now since N4 dropped. Dropped in September of 2020. So we've had a little bit of a chance to play the game and let the rules bed in, and this is the first update that Corvus Belli have done for N4. And it's nice and comprehensive, and there's a few things though that are really important. A few things that are not that much of a surprise is just clarification around how line of fire and zone of control kind of works. Nothing hugely different. Again, how anyone would kind of get those confused, I'm not entirely sure. But yes, good that they are doing these kind of things. Now, the big one that I've noticed on this first page is obviously the movement element of things. In my N4 Rules Abuse video, I highlighted the fact that I had seen a couple of players that were cutting the corner, pretty much using the logic that the ability to squeeze through a gap meant that you could also squeeze around a corner. And so they were using that to gain actually significant movement in certain situations. In fact, I've definitely heard of a game or two where this being done actually did massively decide the outcome of a game in a tournament, which is obviously naughty, but at the time you could kind of plead ignorance. That's now gone. It's super clear what most of us knew, that you cannot cut the corner just because you can imply that from being able to squeeze through gaps that you could do exactly the same. So apologies Corvus Belli that some of us players required this level of clarification on something that was really clear and was basically just people gaming the system. Thank you very much for clarifying it though, so that those people can now focus on trying to game something else that is also fairly redundant and not necessary. I mean, if you're having to try and do these sorts of things, then I just don't think you're a good player, because squeezing off an extra inch of your movement means that you've done something terribly wrong. But that's just me. Anything else on this page that we feel is really earth-shattering? No. The reciprocal line of fire thing is another thing that I mentioned incorrectly in my N4 Rules Abuse, in that I read that so long as if you could see 3 mil but they couldn't see 3 mil back, that you wouldn't be able to return fire. That was not the case, because there was a reciprocal line of fire rule in there, which a couple of people commented on. Thank you so much for those that did. There's a little bit more clarification here, but pretty much if one unit can see another, so long as it's in the firing arc, then it can shoot back. That's pretty much where we're at. Ballistic skill. Nothing major again here. Hacking. There's nothing again here that's really out of the ordinary, but it's good to see. So things like, when you apply firewall mods, those are pretty good, because it does just give clarification as to the step that something occurs. So again, you only use the firewall mods if you're using an enemy repeater to go against an enemy hacker. So that makes it clear. Someone on the Facebook groups was very quick to spot that there was a spelling mistake here. Again, we just appreciate the fact that FAQs are coming out. I think anything else is really nitpicking and it doesn't really need to be mentioned. Again, quite an interesting thing around here with stacking. Not stacking, so with pistols. So this was a nice little bit of clarification, is that pistols with a +1 burst ability, or any plus to their burst, also applies that burst in close combat, which is great to know. I think this maybe slipped under the radar for people, because there was an assumption that the +1 burst was in AR, it was in shooting with ballistic skills. But great that there's now some clarification that it's definitely in CC mode in your active turn. So that is good. Again, bear that in mind. If you've got some CC weapons, if the pistol has +1 burst, it might be beneficial for you to use the pistol instead of your actual close combat weapon if you're getting the benefit of an additional burst. So good to point out. I'm going to apologise with this video as well if you're hearing loads of background noise, because this is just super quick. I just jumped on and I'm starting recording. You're likely to hear a bit more background noise than if I'd managed to choose a time where things were a bit quieter. I'm kind of in the middle of a bit of a storm here in New Zealand, so apologies if that comes through, or if you hear cars in the background too. I love this one, the combat jump onto a rooftop. Again, you could kind of tell that Corvus Belli weren't trying to imply that you couldn't jump on rooftops, like a combat jump or drop onto rooftops. But the rule was quite explicit in that you couldn't jump onto terrain or scenery pieces, and you couldn't benefit from cover. Now, as soon as you're jumping onto a rooftop, you are getting cover because you're going to be higher than some of the things that are trying to ARO you. So it kind of led people to just go, well, you can't do it because you would not be it's very explicit about 2 requirements. So you can't meet it, so you can't drop on rooftops. Locally, we played it that you could drop on a rooftop, but you wouldn't get the benefit of cover because we believed that was the core element of the rule. And it turns out with this FAQ that was kind of right in terms of the interpretation. So you are able to land on a rooftop, but you cannot claim partial cover during that order, which makes complete sense. Absolute sense. Again, I think common sense prevailed with a lot of people in their local groups and how they were playing it, but good for those people who are like absolutely to the letter about rules. At least this makes it clear what you can and cannot do. The Impetuous skill stuff is obviously something that I was awaiting with bated breath. The Impetuous Activation has been an interesting one because it's relatively vague and it's very open to abuse. So, again, playing to the rule, there was nothing stopping you from moving towards an enemy deployment zone, ending closer, but by doing the tiniest movements, kind of, zigzags, or doing a sweeping arc so that you kind of ended closer. This has helped whilst also maintaining the intent behind the rule, which is basically that you're not on suicide mode and you do have some control over the direction that you are heading at. Things like, if you're in the enemy deployment zone, you can just move normally. There's no, again, most people realise that was the intent. You're in the deployment zone. Chances are, if you're in the deployment zone, you've probably got enemy units within your 8 inches. So you're actually going to be forced to head within that because that's the bullet point that you've actually got to try and meet. So again, this is one of those things that I think people blew out of all proportion because they read it and went, oh, this is so open to abuse. In practicality, rarely happened. And if you were in the enemy deployment zone, you were there. Like, chances are your intent was to go and mess things up and head towards the nearest enemy unit anyway. So I think this was one, in theory, was more broken than it really was. The actual one was the movement. So how does movement work during the Impetuous activations if you cannot reach silhouette contact with an enemy? So you go towards the enemy deployment zone. Very, very clear. It's still as vague as they want it to be. So not necessarily the nearest point or anything like that. The trooper must end its movement as far as possible from the movement starting point and as close as possible to the enemy deployment zone. So that gives more clarity on the route that you must take. None of this zigzagging. It's as far as possible from your deployment zone. So again, something like a biker with an 8-inch move, that's got to try and, if possible, start 8 inches away. Immediately as soon as this dropped, there were those people who were on Facebook, again, just go, but what if you're in a corner and you have to back around yourself? That breaks this element of the rule. It's like, this actually makes it clear what the intent is. I actually feel like if you're in a situation where you backed into a corner, it's pretty clear that you can reverse back on yourself if it's going to enable you to end closer to the enemy deployment zone and as far away from possible as your starting point. Obviously, if you're trying to use one line, which is you can't double back on yourself, you're also then breaking a second line, which is you wouldn't be able to move from your starting position, so you would actually not meet the requirements of this rule. I think 9 times out of 10, it's not a problem. Again, you're going to be able to move and stay compliant with the rule. Or you're going to look at the situation and go, do you know what, there's an HMG on the rooftop there with a total reaction copper bot. I'm not going to move because I don't want my face blown off. That's going to be most of the Impetuous rules, is I can move 4 inches towards the enemy deployment zone and pop smoke if I'm a Varangian, or I can use my biker and I can go this way and I'm still going to end up far away from my starting point and towards the enemy deployment zone. Most of the time, it's never going to be a problem. And in the one time it is a problem, it's either a friendly game and you and your mate can just go, okay, dice roll, 1 to 10, I have to do this, and that's what we're doing for the rest of the game, and 11 to 20, we've got to do this. Or you're in a tournament, in which case, that's what a TO is for. So stop trying to find problems with rules that aren't there. Stop trying to make problems with rules that aren't there. Stop trying to make Corvus Belli do work that isn't coming up with new models and new missions. the more time they're having to spend on FAQs because we're being silly, the less time we get for new toys. So you're only ruining it for the rest of us if you carry on smashing these rules into the ground. Anything else that was a major one? Not for me, because I don't ever do it, but there is one in here, and I'm just going to try and grab it. So, sorry. Oh, we're close, we're close. Okay, this one was really clear. I saw this and I was like, how was this an FAQ? Like, it was very obvious that that's how it's actually supposed to work. But again, thank you for the FAQ for the not so frequently asked question because one person asked it. Here we go. This is it. If a trooper uses an airborne deployment skill to deploy on the table via a coordinated order or an impetuous activation, what happens to their own order? In this situation, they will lose their own order. I have never done this, so I didn't really know that this was a huge problem. But again, looking at the Facebook comments after this was launched, I saw a whole bunch of people just saying, oh, you know, that's fat Yan Yan, he's nerfed, he's completely gone. Because apparently it was a thing to kind of rely on this strategy to gain an advantage. Now, again, I never did it, so I don't know how important it is to do these sorts of things. But for me, if your entire strategy relies on a bit of a grey area in the rules, you're doing something wrong. Yeah. Now, again, it's one thing to kind of go, that's a cool thing, I'm going to do it. And it's another thing entirely to basically say your list is now unplayable if that rule gets changed. Maybe it's just I've never been that wargamer that looks at the rules and then just goes, oh, let's abuse that while I can and spam this unit with this rule, and then when it gets nerfed, I'll go on to the next thing. But to me, it just seems very odd to kind of have a rule and that be part or a major part of your strategy. Now, please jump into the comments if I'm missing the point and the perspective, because I really do want to see like everyone's perspective on these sorts of things. And it has intrigued me that when something like a rule gets changed, people just go, oh, super jumps now nerfed, this unit's now unplayable. That sort of stuff. And I just cannot empathize because I've never built a list where I'm reliant on a rule to be the cornerstone of my strategy. So please jump in the comments and explain it to me if you do understand it, whether you do it or not. I'm not going to assume that everyone who jumps in the comments and says, oh, it's because of this, actually relies on that. I'm just going to assume that you're more knowledgeable than me, which is not difficult. So please let me know why that's a common strategy, why people get so precious about it when it does happen. This is just my N4 FAQ hot takes. There's a couple of key things that really jumped out at me, and I wanted to jump on here and just highlight them just in case you weren't aware that the N4 FAQ had dropped. I've got a link to it in the description of this video so that you can check it out yourself. Those are the key things for me. Those are the major things that I wanted to discuss. No major surprises, but good clarifications in a few areas. So Corvus Belli have done an excellent job with this FAQ. I don't think it's broken. I think it's fantastic that they have definitely clarified a few things, and I especially love the fact that you can now berserk when you're in CC. That sounds amazing and brutal and fantastic and fun. But again, don't use that as the cornerstone of your strategy because it might get FAQ'd. Thank you so much for watching this one. Apologies that it's a little bit more boring, but wanted to get something out to you about the FAQ. Stay subscribed. I've got a couple more interesting videos coming very, very soon. And thank you very much for your support. Really do appreciate it. Chat to you soon.